So welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be comparing the New York Parallel compression and the normal parallel compression. So I have some tracks here in which we'll be using for demonstration. So let me play it so you can see the difference before we go into details about them. So the first one we have here is a mix, and this is how the raw signal sound. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow. Now, this is how it sounds with the New York parallel compression. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow. And this is how it sounds with the normal parallel compression. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow. The next section is a drum, and this is how the raw signals sound. So this is how it sounds with the New York parallel compression. And this is how it sounds with the normal parallel compression. Now, also for vocals, this is how the raw vocals sound.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
With the New York parallel compression, it sounds like this.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
Lastly, with the normal parallel compression, it sounds like this.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
So to give you a better idea of what compression does to a mix, I'll solo the raw drum track and the raw vocals. Then I'll do it for the New York parallel compression and the normal regular parallel compression. So this is with the raw sound.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
So this is with the New York parallel compression.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
And lastly, this is with the normal parallel compression.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
Before we go into details on how to achieve all this parallel compression, we need to note the difference between the New York parallel compression and the parallel compression. The New York parallel compression is like the parallel compression, but the difference is that it boosts some of the low ends and the EQ, which makes it sometimes suitable for a general mix. So when do we use parallel compression? We use parallel compression when we want to add body to a sound, most especially when a vocals is not sitting down in a mix. So you want to use parallel compression to add body to the vocals. So parallel compression sometimes also is used for drums, and it can be used individually and for the drum boss. So it can be used for snare to add much more body to the snare, and for kicks also. However, there are other use cases for parallel compression, but these three I mentioned are the three vital roles parallel compression plays. So let me break down how I went about the parallel compression for the mix. So for the New York parallel compression for the mix, the plugin I use is this iArt New York parallel compression by BB Audio. It does a lot and I like it. For parallel compression, you want to exaggerate the compression so much because you'll be blending it with the raw audio signal. Now, for this plugin, it has the spank. So what I'm going to do is to exaggerate the spank up because I want a lot of aggression. And for the output, I'm not going to mess around it. But if I notice that the compressed signal is a bit too loud than the raw signal, I might mess around this output a bit, but most times I just leave it like that. Now, this slider is where you're going to be balancing the raw signal with the compressed version that this plugin is doing. So it's a very wonderful plugin. So if I deactivate the plugin, the mix sounds like this. You are God and most high. So with the plugin on, it sounds like this. You are God and most high. Now, one thing you want to do with this plugin is that you want to use this slider to balance things to you. You are okay with what you are hearing, and it's not adding MIDI frequencies to the mix, or it's not making it sound weird. So I'll move this slider around so that you can see what it's doing. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow at your. So another good feature about this plugin is this solo that allows you to hear what the compression is doing alone. You are God, and most high, the whole earth So that is how I got this sound. You are God and most high. So this plugin makes parallel compression very, very easy. So moving on to the normal parallel compression everybody knows and how to go about it. So what I'll be using for this is to create an FX channel. Some might use bus or aux, but in Studio One, if you use aux, you'll not be able to send the signal directly to the aux except you are sidechaining. So I'm going to be using the FX for this. Then I'm going to come to my send and send that audio signal to that FX channel I've created for it. So this is the mix comp. Then another thing you want to take note is that when you use doing parallel compression, you want to use pre-fade instead of post-fade that you use for reverb. So you want to be sure that this is set to pre-fade. Then once you're done, you can come to the mix comp and add a compressor to it. Now, one thing you want to take note is that when you're doing parallel compression, you don't want to follow any rigid rule. It's going to be determined by the audio signal. Now, the way you do a parallel compression for a mix will be different from drums, bass, or even a snare, or a kick, or even vocals. One thing you just want to take note is that when you're doing parallel compression, you want to exaggerate it. So you want to increase the ratio to as high as possible. I'm setting this to 20. Some could put it at 18, 15 or so. It's based on preference. Another thing you want to take note of is that is a threshold. So with this threshold will determine the amount of gain reduction you'll be seeing here. So let's see the amount of gain reduction that will be happening in this plugin. Okay, so with the compression on, it sounds like this. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow at your so basically, you want to target your gain reduction between 10 to 20. It's just based on preference. There's no rigid rule about this. The idea is that you just want something that's going to come out fine. So currently, it was hitting about 19. So I messed around with the threshold and it was hitting about 16 or 17. So let me solo off and on so that you can hear the difference. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow at your Now, another thing you want to take note is the attack and release. Some might just tell you set the attack this way, set the release that way. No, it's actually based on what you're working with. Now, because this is a mix, I kept the attack to a reasonable time, about 2.24 milliseconds, so that the transient from the song, the drums can maintain, the attack and everything. Then the release, I didn't make it go ridiculous because I wanted it to sound as natural as possible. I also want it to have life because if I drop this release down, it's as if the song will become lifeless. You are God and most high, the whole earth bow. Now, if I exaggerate the release too much, you will notice that the compressor is not letting go before the next part of the song. It's just as if it's holding it and it's going to sound really terrible. You are God and most high. So you want to mess around these two settings till you're comfortable with what you're hearing. So there's no rigid rule about this. It's just based on personal preference and what you want to hear. Now, lastly, on the mix compression, you want to balance the raw signal with the compressed signal. So basically, the difference is that instead of a plugin doing everything, you have to do it yourself. So you want to balance it till you are okay with what you can hear. You are God and most high. So you want to listen to it properly to be sure that it's sounding natural and it's also adding the weight and the body to the mix. So the next section is the drum section, and we'll still be using the same parallel compression we use for the New York parallel compression. So basically, if I'm to solo the drum without the New York parallel compression, it sounds like this. With the New York parallel compression, it sounds this way. Now, there isn't much to explain here. You want to set your spank as high as possible because you want so much compression. So you want to adjust the slider till you're satisfied with it. So one good way to checkmate what you're doing is to go back and front between the raw signal and with the parallel compression. So the next part is the normal parallel compression. And to do this is quite simple. You want to add an FX channel for the drum compression. You could use a bus channel, fine. It's all about preference, but this just works fine. Then you want to send that signal to that FX channel. Then once you've done that, you want to make sure that this is pre and not post. Then you want to add a compressor. So here it's the same principle. I'm going to increase the ratio because I want a very hard compression. Then I'm going to adjust the threshold till I can get about 10 to 20 dB compression. So let me see how many compression we are getting there. So you can see we are getting minus 17 dB gain reduction. Another important thing is the attack and the release. Like I said, the way you're going to approach it for different sound audio signals should be different. So what I was doing for this attack is I was going back and forth to listen to the snare to make sure that the attack is not lost while I adjust this attack knob. So let me do back and forth so you see. So if I drop the attack down, you will see what will happen to the snare. You see that the snare has lost a lot of its attack. So that's how I was able to set the attack. For the release, I was listening to the kick to get a good point to set the kick. So if I'm to solo it off and on, just listen to the kick. Now, if I drop this release down totally, listen to what happens to the kick. So immediately the drums becomes lifeless. So you want to mess around this till you get a good setting. So there's no rigid rule. Lastly, once you are done, you want to create a balance between the raw signal and the compressed version with these sliders. So that's why it's important to set this to prefade. So the next part is the vocals section. And for the New York parallel compression, I'll be using the same plugin. If I'm to solo the vocals without the New York parallel compression, it sounds like this.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love,
With it, it sounds this way.
calling Dr. Love, calling Dr. Love.
So basically, the same thing. Increase the spank up because I want a lot of aggression and balance the raw signal with the original signal till I am satisfied it's adding weight. At the same time, it's not taking the mix away from what it's supposed to be, and it's not adding things that is not required. So this slider is based on preference of on what you want to achieve. So the next part is the normal parallel compression. So what you want to do is to create an FX channel, for that. So what you want to do is to create an FX channel, which is very simple, in Studio One. So you want to send that audio signal to that FX channel. So once you've done that, you want to make sure that your prefade is on. So you want to come to the FX channel and load a compressor. Now, the ratio is about 20:1 because we want the compressor to be aggressive. So for the threshold, you want to adjust it, you can get about 10 to 20 dB gain reduction. So without the parallel compression, it sounds like this.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr.
With the parallel compression, it sounds this way.
Calling Dr. Love, calling Dr.
So you can see we are getting about 14 to 16 dB gain reduction. Now, for these vocals, the attack was a bit lower than the rest because I wanted the vocals to sound smooth, at the same time retain some of the attack. So I didn't want it to sound like ah ah. For this vocal, I kept the attack at about 0.116 milliseconds because I wanted the vocals to sound as smooth as possible, while it also retain the dynamics. Now for the release, also I kept it about 2.4 milliseconds because I wanted the compressor to disengage before the next part of the vocals come in. So listen to what he's doing.
Calling Doctor Love, calling,
So if I'm to exaggerate this release, see what happens.
calling Doctor Love, calling Doctor.
So you could see how it sounds really, really terrible. So most times I go between the raw signal and the compressed to see what the compression is actually adding to the raw signal.
Calling Doctor Love, calling Doctor Love, calling Doctor Love, calling Doctor Love, calling.
So you could adjust these settings based on preference, but you want to treat each signal differently for the attack and the release, also the threshold. So lastly, after adding the compressor, I blended the raw signal with the compressed version till I can get much more weight and body and also retain the originality of the sound. So in conclusion, that's how to go about the New York parallel compression and the regular parallel compression. So if the New York parallel compression, a low ends and high ends are actually added. So if you want to achieve same sound, you could add little low end and high end on this your parallel compression. But better still, just use a plugin that does all of that for you and save you stress. Thank you for watching this tutorial and subscribe for more.